Good evening and welcome back to Solutionary TV. Waking Up Solutionary TV presents Ascension Series. I am your co-host, Dr. Tatiana, and thrilled to reintroduce my co-host, Genesee. Genesee, are you with us? Lovely.
I am with you and so happy to be here another Monday night.
We have got a really amazing lineup this evening. We're all kind of vetting in from various locations around the globe. I am going to be just announcing that I am here at home preparing for a string of hurricanes that is coming up on the Atlantic seaboard, and recognizing that being an anchor for calm and peace and a sense of divine alignment was kind of important tonight. So we are not in the studio. We're all kind of vetting in from Google Hangouts. And I'm really excited to welcome our guest tonight, who is not new to his own line of production. It is Adam Riva with Dauntless Dialogue. And he is perfect for tonight because his wealth of wisdom and the level of expertise that he has brought on his own show, being very, very courageous in bringing forth guests that are part of the hard curve of our education, bringing others into an awakened state, that the world as we know it is not the way that it has been handed to us on a cookie cutter sheet. Part of the work that we've been doing, Genesee, with the shadow and being clear that we need to move through archetypes and we need to take a look at our own darkness is another layer of education that we're looking at bringing on tonight. So I'm excited to welcome Adam. Adam, you've got so many different, perks behind your name in terms of what you have been able to do with bringing exposure to the occult and holistic health and what would be considered conspiracy potential truths, dealing with some of the elite and the practices, cults, and rituals, where we're going with science and transhumanism. We are really thrilled to have you. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I think we're going to have a great conversation tonight.
I have no doubt of that. I know that Genesee and I have talked several times about getting into the darker underside of humanity. And because we always want to be coming from a solutionary place, it has been our natural preponderance to talk about the issues that we're experiencing with at a global level, but always going into that feel-gooder space of, you know what, we have so many solutions. Let's bring the experts on and employ them. But I think you know very painfully well that if we don't dig deep into some of the very less popular and sometimes downright traumatizing aspects of what is the seedy aspects that are coming to light now with politics and with government systems and with the way that so many of our industries are run. I mean, it's really just a global aspect of unconsciousness that most of humanity needs to be aware of, sufficient for us to go into healing. Let's talk about Dauntless Dialogue and what got you to be so upfront and courageous in bringing some of this to light.
Oscar Wilde said, if you want to tell someone the truth, you have to make them laugh first. And I think that if you're confronting someone's identity or someone's ego or someone's conception of the world, you have to begin by inviting their guard to stand down. So one of the things that I do with my podcasts and with all of my various, outlets is I try to come at it with a sense of lightheartedness, a sense of humor, because I think that spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. So Dauntless Dialogue is my particular take on it. I come at it with I think a unique flavor. And I'd like to address some of the darker aspects of humanity, some of the darker conspiracies that are being perpetrated in the world. There's a lot of nefarious things that you can kind of dig your hands into. And a lot of that can cause people to retreat, either emotionally or at least in their investigation. They can halt that investigative process right before it gets good and right before, as you pointed out, they get to the solutions. So I'd say that that's my approach to it, and I think it's reaching people in a new and innovative way.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's unquestionable. We do want to find common ground and we want to create a sense of safety and familiarity. But some of the topics that you've recently covered with the experts that were very much involved in some of these covert groups and maybe forced into certain practices that many of us would consider to be so nightmarish that we wouldn't want to go there, has been equally, I'm assuming, a challenge for you to add that extra spoonful of sugar or go into humor, because it's just such a sobering conversation to have. But with all that is coming out with some of our greatest technological experts, if we're talking about transhumanism, for instance, we know that AI has reached a singularity. I had a crowdsource the truth with Jason Goodman the beginning of the year or the end of last year. And one of his experts had said, listen, we've already had an AI singularity. We're moving towards a transhumanistic future. That is a timeline that's out there. There are a lot of big minds that seem to think that this is a great idea, and implementations have already happened. With Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement, we know that there is a really dark underbelly to at least the entertainment industry, and what Corey Feldman has done in trying to expose pedophilia in Hollywood. And we know it reaches all the way up into elite circles around the world. So how do you bring the hard edge of education to a show like this, and welcome our audience into how can I hold your hand and compassionately let you know that there really are demons in the closet, and as soon as we can face them, we can get through this and we can start to shine a lot of light on that space where we're all going to feel a lot safer and a lot more comfortable. How do you welcome that audience?
Well, it's a great question. And I'm on a journey, so I invite others to join me on my journey. I don't claim to have arrived at the alpha and omega truth. I just want to bring people along and try to connect some of the dots that I find valuable. You know, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I think, deduced a couple of things, and I can share a few nuggets of wisdom that I think I've gleaned. But I invite others into the process by saying, look, you're a part of the problem, which means you're a part of the solution. And as you pointed out in the beginning of our conversation, these problems arise from a collective unconscious. If we all turn a blind eye to certain aspects of the human condition, then that's going to cause certain problems down the road. So it's the 5-second miracle. You know, if you can take credit for the good, the bad, and the ugly in your life, then you can be a force for change in your own life and in the lives of others.
That's exactly true. And I know that I'm not going to quote this exactly, and I can't even right now readily come to mind on who said it, but it had more to do with the fact that great evil persists when good men do nothing. And I think that the vast majority of our population, at their very heart and their soul, are good people, and they want to get along with their families and their neighbors. They want to contribute to society. And at the same time, they want to believe that the same is true, the same level of predictable benevolence is true of most of society, particularly their leaders. So let's talk about some of the hot topics that you and I knew we would want to get into tonight that you think are particularly relevant to what's going on right now with Q, and maybe with 51,000 indictments that are looking to spring anytime soon. And I welcome Genesee to dive in on this one. This has been a baby I've been brewing with Adam for a while now, but so much needs to be shared on Shadow. Genesee, I'm going to open it up to the both of you.
Certainly, I can jump in if you want. So as far as the 51,000 sealed indictments go, this is building the stage for a legal recourse for mass arrests. If the white hats in our government and in the military were to do a covert sting operation in the middle of the night without doing it the proper way, then there would be the potential for the public who is asleep right now to kind of look at them and say, well, this is martial law, this is tyranny, this is an Orwellian takeover, you know, and they wouldn't necessarily know to point to who the good guys are versus who the bad guys are. So I think the fact that they're doing it legally, you know, with white gloves on, can actually be part of the reasoning to point to people and say, look, do you think that they would go about it the right way? Do you think that they would go about it the painstaking way by laying the grounds for legal arrests? So I would say that if there's anything we can point to that's optimistic about the unfolding of the cabal or the deep state versus the alliance is the fact that there are legal sealed indictments on the record. Sealed indictments have to be, each and every one has to be decided upon by a secret grand jury. So this is something which has been a long time in the making. And I think it's going to boil to a head, or come to a head, very quickly and very suddenly, at least as far as most people are concerned. But it's like, the Beatles or Queen was an overnight success. It's like, no, they were playing in clubs for 10 years before they finally got noticed and finally got big. And I think we're going to see that here. And it's going to take us, who've kind of been connecting the stars into the constellation, to point out to others, to say, well, look, this has been a long time in the making. This has been going on not just for a year, or not just since the election. This is as old as, this is 40, 50 years old. And I think that that is another sign that this is being done the right way, is that it's been poured over by some of the best minds and some of the best white hats about how we're going to do this the right way. So, individuals, or not individuals, but sources like Q represent a voice for the white hats to communicate and disseminate messages to the masses. I know that there's a lot of people who have, jumped off the Q bandwagon. That's okay. We don't need to believe any one particular source, because there's so many sources corroborating the same things right now. I have a source who I've been sharing information with on my channel, Dauntless Dialogue, for about a year. And I've given him the pseudonym Arthur. And to date, his videos, or at least the videos that I've compiled, which share some of the conversations I've had with him with some of these briefings, those tend to be the most popular videos on my channel. And I've received some criticism for either the way I do them, or how reputable they are. And that's okay. I've never claimed that this is an impeccable source. What I have said at the beginning of every video is, use your discernment. And if this lines up with your particular research and your particular worldview, great. If it doesn't, discard it. That's okay too. But one of the things that I haven't shared on my channel yet, which actually, for those who follow any of David Wilcock's information, or any of Corey Good's information, or even Benjamin Fulford, Q made the announcement recently about the CIA satellites that were taken down. So I was actually told this by Arthur, and I haven't shared this on my channel yet. This is the first time I'm talking about it publicly. And of course, I'm fully willing to admit right here, right up front, that when Arthur shares certain things with me, I don't have a way of necessarily proving that I received this before the deadline, before everyone else shared it, before Q shared it, before David Wilcock shared it. However, I can tell you that I was told this, and he was told to sit on this for about 2 weeks. So this is information which, if you go back on my channel, Arthur has said things that, days later or months later were corroborated by Q or other sources. So in my personal opinion, I think that Arthur has shared with me some very fascinating, very intriguing intel. But again, I always caution my audience, use your discernment. Certainly this is something that, this investigation is something we all need to be skeptical about. We all need to be discerning about this, because there's so much disinformation and misinformation. And if there's one thing that I've seen that's a truism throughout, my decade and a half researching conspiracies, is that they leave no stone unturned. The adversary, as I call it, is working against humanity in such a way where they know you better than you know yourself in a lot of ways. So they know how to control the opposition. They know how to get ahead of a trend before it trends. And so I always admonish my audience, use discernment with every source, and never let your guard down. And that doesn't mean be paranoid. It just means have a grain of salt with everything you hear.
Adam, that's so important. I think that our audience, we haven't really gotten into the 51,000 plus indictments, but, and a lot of people don't understand, what is a sealed indictment? What is this secret grand jury? What does it mean to go through a military tribunal? to just give a little bit of background, and please feel free to embellish, in any given year, I'm told that the average amount of sealed indictments for necessary reasons of taking down a major drug cartel, or being able to corral in a bunch of subversive mafiosos, might have been tops 1,000 between November 2017 and today. So we're not even at a full year. We're at over 51,000, I believe 345. It is tremendous. This is unprecedented. And when Trump, aka a tool or a puppet of the alliance, instrumental and powerful or not, said he's going to drain the swamp, and we've seen nothing but mayhem and a whole lot of displacement of would-be leaders in various organizations and in areas that we would consider, between the CIA and the FBI and his own cabinet. Aren't these secure? Can't we count on this? The answer is no. There is a lot of revealing that's going on, and that has a lot to do with these 51,000 plus indictments that are eventually going to be seen and heard. But there was such compelling evidence, even in an ex parte setting, without having the individual there to be able to gain these indictments. We're really looking at a massive overtake of a lot of corruption behind the scenes, aren't we, Adam?
Oh, absolutely. So in my own work, I've been covering a lot of the pedogate material. Some call it Pizzagate, but I think that's more of an insulated incident, whereas pedogate or systemic pedophilia is what I use to refer to the problem at large over the course of the last century. Pizzagate was sort of in reference to the Tony Podesta, Hillary Clinton email scandal. But when I say pedogate, I'm not just referring to that instance. I'm talking more about over the last century. One of the things that I've been doing is I'm compiling all this into a book. And right now, as far as I know, there's only one other person who's really getting this information out there in a thorough, comprehensive way, connecting all of the dots, and that's Joaquim Hagopian. And he and I are going about it in a very similar way, which is, publishing one chapter or several chapters at a time, making them public, not sitting on this information. I don't want my life to be threatened. I want to get it out there to the masses free of charge. I encourage everyone to share it as far and wide as possible. So outside of the topic of the sealed indictments, one of the things I've been covering are the thousands upon thousands of pedophiles and human traffickers that have been rounded up and arrested over the last year or two. And the numbers are astonishing. So similar to how you said about 1,000 sealed indictments is the annual average in America, about 400 pedophiles are arrested in America annually. That's a pretty good estimate. And in my own research, that number has skyrocketed into the tens of thousands over the since Trump was elected. And so, there is, as you said, we don't know necessarily, is he being used by the alliance? Is he, either way, he's sort of the spearhead for this publicly, since Q and others are not necessarily public. So there's been a lot of bolstering of the law enforcement agencies, of the various, SEAL teams and SWAT teams and the National Guard and, special forces. They are being, they're being fortified. They're finally receiving the support that they have always deserved. A lot of times their efforts have been stymied, so we haven't necessarily seen the sweeping arrests and the crackdown that we should have. In fact, we saw the exact opposite. We saw a systematic cover-up that has been in place in the mainstream media. There's been a clampdown on this. Law enforcement, as I mentioned, has been stymied. Washington, D.C., the entertainment industry, even internationally, some of the Peace Corps, some of the adoption agencies. There's a lot of different sectors of society which are compromised. This is something which I'm working fastidiously to bring forward to the public in my upcoming book, which hopefully will be out next year.
Wonderful. What's the title of that book, Adam?
It's a working title right now, so I don't know if this is set in stone, but
Mhm.
um, child sacrifice and the global pedophile empire exposing the darkest industry on earth.
Wow. Wow. So that's loaded. And I just want to say to our audience that has done a couple dives with us into the cover up and a lot of the misinformation that we've all had, being part of this society, being part of the United States with its over compromised aspects of its systems because corporate owns so much. So many things are ultimately funneled through a very narrow bandwidth of control and power. If we are going to address where we've been so that we can heal where we've been, and what Genesee and I do a lot of work on this show, talking about the shadow, looking at the archetypes of humanity, looking back at areas of ourselves that we have been blind to or refusing to see, then we really can't move forward in this natural trajectory of human evolution, which we believe is both a mental, emotional, physiological, and spiritual birthright. So I appreciate you saying what you're saying, Adam. We know that what you're doing is seeking to expose things that society hasn't wanted to look at, and that certain power brokers have known as a trend or a way of being since our very earliest human history. I mean, we knew about human sacrifice biblically, historically, so much in our mythology and in our human origins. I think we just all wanted to believe that the world has remained safe and that our systems are always looking out for us. But it is being leaked left and right that there has been horrible mismanagement of children separated from parents at our borders. We have come to find that child welfare offices across the world are reporting how many thousands of children go missing. We have record numbers of women and children being sold into sex trafficking. We can't heal the underbelly, and we can't move forward with embodying and cleansing, healing, and releasing the shadow if we're blind to such huge numbers of travesty that are being experienced in our society. And that takes us from where we've been, which is a huge mouthful and a monstrous topic, enough that you're doing a book and then some, but also where is it that we want to go? Because if we don't shift, if we don't claim back our sovereignty and step into our power and make peace with what has been and heal what has been, we know that there's a future that's also been prescribed for us. And you've done some really good exposés on transhumanism. Let's kind of talk about that agenda, where we've been. We can bounce back to, but where are we going, Adam, based on the experts you've had on Dauntless Dialogue?
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to make one quick comment about, to your point about identifying the problem and diagnosing the problem. One of the things that I do in my work is I try to come at these conspiracies with a dose of philosophy. When I started Dauntless Dialogue, I did that in response. I was looking around and I was saying, someone needs to do this. There's so many news outlets, there are so many reporting agencies that are so superficial and so surface level that don't dig deep into the spiritual malady that man is facing, which is the ideological genesis of some of these conspiracies or some of these darker problems that we're facing. And so
Mhm.
you and I just from listening to you today, it seems like we use a lot of the same vocabulary. I've written articles on my website. One of them comes to mind was called Baptized in the Shadows. And I do think we need to be willing to confront the darker aspects of ourselves, as Carl Jung wrote about, if we hope to solve this problem, because it's ultimately a psychological problem.
Mhm.
And, if you were a doctor trying to diagnose the world with some of these conspiracies, you would say, where does it begin? If you were a good doctor, not necessarily from the Western medical system, but if you were looking at it from a first diagnose the problem, and you recognize that when we are willfully ignorant and when we turn our backs on psychological aspects, our darker drives, potentially like lust or fear or hatred or those sort of energies from that end of the spectrum. When we operate our daily behavior from that, it manifests in some of these things.
Mhm. I
Um,
agree. And that philosophical point that you made, it kind of brings us back to a higher mind, doesn't it, Adam? It brings us back to places where we've heard something that was very poignant and wise and went, yes, that resonates with me down to my core. It makes me think twice about some of the things I'm passive about. Mark Twain has a wonderful quote because, you know, my background is in philosophy. That actually is what I got my doctorate in. And I love bringing those pieces together that we all can find common ground with that hit us at a moral note. Mark Twain said, it isn't the stuff that you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's the stuff you know for certain that just ain't so. And there is a lot of that going on, which unfortunately breeds cognitive dissonance. And so, bringing everyone back into a place of if we don't face the aspects of society and ourselves that we find unpleasant, then we are actually giving it our power and permission to continue. Wouldn't you agree with that sentiment, Adam?
I would. And that's a great segue into transhumanism, because one of the alarming trends that we see right now, for those who are paying attention, is the worship of artificial intelligence
Mm-hmm.
and the steadfast support for it, despite some of the potentially alarming problems. Now, I've kind of dissected it, and I have some notes here if you don't mind. But I think one of the problems that we have with AI, and we'll get into all of the nuances of it. One of the problems is that we have a hard time identifying the boundaries between biological life and this, rise in the synthetic or the artificial. For me, it's one of the one of the basic things that we need to begin to ask ourselves if we want to transition Earth and civilization into a peaceful tomorrow. We have to say, where is the boundary between the natural and the artificial?
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting increasingly hard to identify that. For the longest time, technology served us, and now it seems like we're starting to serve technology. There's three types of transhumanism that I've seen, and please, I invite you to contribute if you think I've missed one. I think there's the technological, the pharmaceutical, and the genetic. The technological is the easiest, I think, to see because, we have so much science fiction depicting it, the cyborgs, right? Um, with the increasing legislative push to mandate RFIDs in just about everything from your license to your passport, you're being increasingly tracked. And of course, there's that old, biblical reference to the mark of the beast. And they want the RFID chips in our bodies. They want you to be plugged into the technocratic grid. And in doing so, you are not only traceable or trackable, but think about all the different ways that they can control your behavior. Let's say that chip is used just like the chip in your credit card to make transactions, to make purchases. Well, if you're a dissident and you're going up against the state, or you're going up against the Illuminati, or you're going up against someone powerful somewhere who doesn't like you, they can deny your ability to purchase food, to travel, to do whatever. They can block you at national borders or at state borders. So that's something to look out for. And the further along that we progress with that, Google and a lot of these different companies, they're pushing brain implants. I don't know if you've seen any of these headlines, and they sell it to you in this, attractive and sexy and fun way. It's like, if you get this brain implant, you'll be able to control your toaster oven. You'll be able to lock your door without using your keys. You'll be able to drive your car. You'll be able to interface with your friend as if you were using a phone. And you won't need all those gadgets. We're just going to minimize it and just put it right into your brain. Have you ever
Exactly. Elon Musk has done a lot of warning and foreshadowing about that, but then again, at the same time, has his own technology, as many of us know, with neural lace, and so it's a confusing thing, I think, for a lot of our mutual audiences because they're not quite sure: is this something that is avoidable and I can actually evolve naturally as an organic being, or is this something that we're all being forced into? So I find it fascinating that you're sharing that it's already even moved well past that, and there's already some degree of marketing on it, because I have not seen that as of yet.
Absolutely. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg has even gone on the record and said the ultimate goal of Facebook at some hypothetical timeline in the future, they want to be able to upload the digital you, to upload your consciousness to the internet, so to speak. And he says, your grandchildren, long after you're dead, will be able to interface with you.
Right.
Right. Your pictures, your video, the sound of your voice, the way that you move, all of that will be consolidated down into a digital replica, a simulacra, or a clone of you. Mm-hmm. And so again, they're doing their best to market it. And that's one of the things that I want to get to a little bit later on. I'll touch on it briefly now, is that they have to sell us these things, because a lot of these things are jarring when we first hear them. And I would argue that a lot of people wouldn't go along with the agenda if they didn't put in all these bells and whistles and perks and gadgets. So I think part of their goal is to sell us these things, is to make them cool, is to make you feel like you don't belong to the collective, because we all know that ostracism illuminates the same parts of the brain as physical torture does, because ostracism is genetic death for any member of a tribe, because you'll be denied sexual access. So we have such a deep biological and psychological urge to belong, to conform, to be accepted. And so again, they make you feel like, well, if you don't get along, if you don't go along, you won't get along. And they have to sell us these things.
Exactly. So you've covered, the first aspect of transhumanism. Let's go ahead and just cover all of them, and then we'll kind of do some reflection on what our actual choices are, because we want to come back to the solutions. What we know allows us to be much more conscious in our choosing.
Absolutely. So we are chemical beings, and that's okay. That's a good thing. That's why when we take certain herbs or we eat certain foods, it interacts with us in different ways. It can be medicine or it can be poison. So one of the ways that they're looking to upgrade humanity in transhumanism with what they're calling H+, humanity plus something, is the pharmaceutical form of transhumanism. And I don't know if you remember the movie Limitless, where the gentleman took a pill and suddenly all of his wildest dreams came true. His mind was enhanced, his proprioception, his focus, his memory, all of these various aspects of his being were, amplified. And yes, they sell you that. And there's, they're teasing it. A lot of these pharmaceutical companies are teasing it, and they're saying, well, we're right on the edge of having the limitless pill. And, I work in a health food store. I manage a health food store, and we sell things like nootropics, and there are natural versions, things like ginkgo or gotu kola, or, various herbs that enhance our cognition, or lion's mane, for instance. They have neurogenesis properties. So I'm not talking about those necessarily. I would say, that falls into the natural side of the equation. But when we're synthesizing things, when we're creating things from scratch, we're not as brilliant as we think. And so when we're mass producing, pharmaceuticals in a factory, and we're leaving out the essence of the plant, if we're leaving out the essence of nature and all of the different cofactors that make that plant medicinal, yes, we're trying to go with a pharmaceutical shortcut. I would say that is the wrong approach. And we all know about side effects. And as David Icke once said, they're not side effects. If that's what the drug does, just call it the effects. Stop putting the word side in there. It's the effects.
You've got to love David, because he just says it straight up, doesn't he?
He really does. But this is, again, so whether it's a technological approach or a pharmaceutical approach, they're promising you something. They're promising to enhance your senses. And, one other, I think, obvious way that people can conceptualize this is look at the steroids movement. I go to the gym, 4 or 5 times a week, and I do it naturally. I've never even had the desire to look at or touch steroids, but there are a lot of people who do. And why? Because it's a short-term gain, but it comes with all these long-term health effects, these adverse effects. You know, you're screwing up your neurotransmitters, you're screwing up your hormones, you know, you're taking things that are gender bender chemicals, you know, so you're going to pay the price ultimately. And so if people want to kind of really quickly conceptualize what I mean when I say the pharmaceutical approach to transhumanism, one easy example are steroids. Now, last but not least, we have the genetic form of transhumanism. And this is a little more sophisticated. And again, if your guard is down, you might be tempted to be sold on this. In China right now, they're doing all of this IQ research, and they're promising to be able to turn up the volume on your IQ so that all of us can have a 200 IQ, and we're all going to be geniuses. And again, I want to make it clear to your listeners, I'm not saying I'm 100% against these things. I think we need to weigh them in the balance. I think we need to take a cautious approach. I think we need to look at who's selling us these things. I think we need to look at the research ourselves. And I think we need to have testing of these things, because right now, I think we're falling into what Einstein warned about, where our technological capacity has surpassed our humanity.
Yes.
You know, but again, you know, a couple other examples of the genetic form of transhumanism is the hybridization programs. A lot of these are underground. And I know you listen to some of Corey Good's material and some of the Secret Space Program material. So there are a lot of dark projects, classified projects, special access programs where they're doing a lot of these hybridization and cloning programs. But even something as basic as longevity, increasing human longevity. Again, I'm not saying I'm averse to that, but at what cost? And what's the methodology? How? I want to know how, and I want to know why. Because a lot of the time we don't stop and ask the question, you know, how and why, or even who is selling us these things. We just immediately, impulsively go along with it. And that's where we run into problems.
Yes. And thank you. That was really beautifully put together. And I can see the value in why breaking down the directions of transhumanism and what agendas are already in place, what products may already be out there, what science is actually being investigated is important. I teach an energy medical intuitive course, and it abuts or it comes as a prerequisite to another course that is about understanding that the Earth's sentience and our sentience are in a state of homeostasis, and that we're going through a lot of changes on the planet. And part of those changes are, you've got to know some of the tough stuff that has actually been going on throughout human society, especially within those power circles, power broker circles, that many of us never question who the they or the them happen to be, so that we can call in that sovereignty and make very lucid decisions about what futures we want to be able to create for ourselves and for our families and for society. There are multiple timelines. We're dealing with parallel realities. Part of that PowerPoint includes a really important clip from Geordie Rose, the former founder of D-Wave, where he talks about, you know, these massive quantum computers that sound eerily, you know, like a heartbeat, and are like standing at the altar of an alien god. And his attitude about the predictions he made at the end of this particular Silicon Valley conference that he did this keynote for, gave predictions for three things that have already happened. And he's since moved on to one of them, and the one that he was the most fond of, which was getting AI through his company Kindred to be able to progress to such a point that it could do everything. And he was very clear, not just computing, not just data crunching, every single thing that human beings can do, intimate, moral, political, creative, everything better than we can do it ourselves. And when you don't know that this has been an agenda for decades, and you don't know that it has actually already been achieved at various levels, we as a society can't even begin to get up and create a day that is as intentioned and informed as we need to be to understand what's going on in this world of miscommunication and confused discernment. So I really appreciate you breaking it down that way. And I want to welcome Genesee into the conversation because she's followed some of your work recently. We talk again about the shadow and what needs to take place for all of us to step into our power, claim our sovereignty, and use our tools. Genesee, I hope that I'm not putting you on the spot, gal, but I want to bring you into the conversation. And how we can appeal to our audience in waking up enough in a loving and in a supported and a handheld way so that we can actually broach these topics and move through them. What are your thoughts, my dear?
Yeah, I thank you, Adam. I love listening to you. You have such a beautiful cadence to how you talk. So that is the spoonful of sugar, I think, that comes along with your message. And I, like Tatiana said, I have been more recently introduced to you. As soon as Tatiana and I met, she actually talked about you. You were one of the first people she talked to me about. So I'm excited to have the pleasure of meeting you tonight and listening more fully to you in a one-on-one way. And so watching some of your videos on Dauntless Dialogue, I was privileged enough to click on two and watch two very different episodes. But you had referenced the same comment in response to your guest. You said something, and I might be a little out of context here, but you had expressed to them that consciousness is an expansive state and is only so connected. And then you posed this question to them and you said, and this was to two different individuals, you said, but what are you doing now? And it just went right through me as somebody who has been more recently introduced to what is called the disclosure movement. I've always been somebody who's been I've done all my work on myself. I've been a very solo experiential journeyer that figured a lot of what's talked about in disclosure. I figured it out for myself and how I interact with the world. And so when I heard you say consciousness is an expansive state, right? Because in my world, it's all about the oscillation cycles, right? Expanding myself to the most open degree, and then bringing that back down and being human with it, and seeing how I can, through my authenticity, help to change the world, right? And so when I heard you say, "But what are you doing now?" To this, movement, it put me right back into, well, have I been ignoring something? And I question, and I go right back into a vibrational question of myself, um, maybe what would you say to somebody like me who has been this solo, because I believe I'm your target market. I've been a solo journeyer. I've been clearing my SHIT, but and I work in the world in a very clean way. But do I engage in researching about the depths, layers, and intricacies of this sex trafficking, and do I really make myself 100% knowledgeable about these things? And it's no, I know my connection and my, and how I interact with the world, but I'm not taking a deep dive. And so how, I'm not asking a specific question, just kind of pouring my bucket on you and saying, number one, what would you say to somebody like me? And I'm here, and you can say anything you want. So, if you're like, girl, you need to get with it and start researching, tell me like it is. Tell me what your opinions of somebody like me are, who is expansive, but maybe what are you doing in the here and now?
Well, first of all, girl, you need to get with it. No.
Yeah.
One of the things that is paramount for listeners to understand is that the desire to go out and do something, the desire to change, the desire to go out and ameliorate the world is a noble one. And no one's questioning that intention. But the process of doing it is more complicated than it seems at face value. And so Jordan Peterson talks about how, a lot of the 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds that are out there that are on university campuses, they're being wound up and they're told to go out and change things. And he's saying, well, hold on. The odds of you improving things is actually less likely than the odds of you making things worse, because we need to start with ourselves. You know, we need to begin the process of peeling back layers, of unconditioning, of unlearning, before we can then build a solid foundation and build upon that, so that when we bring ourselves into the world, you know what, we've done a lot of the cleansing, we've done a lot of the detoxing, and we know that we're coming at the world with clean eyes, or clean vision, you know, straight and narrow vision. So that would be what I would say to you. And hey, I'm a fellow solo journeyer. I was for 10 years. I didn't have anyone to relate to. And so I can relate now. I can relate to you, and I can relate to others who are on that solo journey. And I would say the connections with others will come in time. Do the internal work first.
Yeah.
And so may I ask a follow-up then? So then you had your solo journey and really aligned to an authenticity that was unwavering within you, that nobody outside of you could dictate to you what your truths were, and you acquired that level of discernment over what was coming at you. So then in that, and with it sounds like your background in film production and what you were in connection to, was it that you felt like there was nobody out there that had a platform or wasn't speaking these truths, that then triggered you to come out in a more public way to start engaging with people over some of the truths that you had then discovered within your own journey, and some of the things that weren't in resonance anymore that you were seeing in your external world?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. I'm having shirts made right now that say, "Wake up or shut up." And
You are not. Are you? I love it.
I want one, Adam. I'm going to send you the address at the end of the show, because Waking Up Solutionary TV is saying the exact same thing with a smile. Wake up and be part of the solution, or shut the F up, because all you're doing is regurgitating the problem. So thank you for that. That is needful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're going to be available at Dauntless Dialogue. But I say that in jest, but I also say it with a serious tone, and like you said, a smile on my face, because there's so many people who immediately, you know, they've spent a week in the disclosure movement, and then they want to immediately become a public mouthpiece. And that's okay. Again, I'm not questioning anyone's intentions. I'm not here to put anyone down and say, like, you're coming from a bad place. It's a noble place to start, but begin with the introspective work, begin with the meditation, weed out your garden before you plant things. I think that's important, and I think people forget that.
That was so poignant, and I want to validate both of you, because having done the solo journey myself, but having this been a lifelong solo journey, and I'm in my late 40s, I can tell you that has been relentless, probably right there with that synonymous energy of dauntless, Adam. It is important to be doing our inner work, and there's layers to this. I mean, there's spirals of layers that we find within ourselves. And one of the big things that I'm noticing with my students and my clients that I'm asking them to embrace is that there are humanity's archetypes that are needing to be healed as well. Not everyone in our society is choosing to look at their own shadow, let alone the spatial, macrocosmic shadow that is the darkness underbelly that has been allowed to fester because humanity didn't want to look at themselves, let alone look at that macrocosm. And so embodying those archetypes, looking and recognizing them, asking what parts of them need to be integrated and healed so that humanity can experience a natural and spiritual state of evolution, has really been a big goal and I would say motivating purpose behind my work and coming together with Genesee. if you kind of circle back on where we've been, and we just touched on something that I think is, when people say, what's the horrible stuff that's gone on in history that you're saying is about to come to a head and possibly show up in these 51,000 plus indictments? And I have to say, based on what I've seen, and I've seen it, I've seen the evidence, I have seen tapes, I've seen the videos, I've heard the testimony, and I have sat with many as a coach that have been part of satanic ritual abuse. And I want to say to those that say, what's the worst that could come out? Worse than anything you've ever thought you could ever possibly hear. It will unearth you. And if we're going to heal it, cure it, stop it, and refine ourselves as a spatial society, as a more moral and less technical, as a more moral and less focused on acquisition and the externalization of our values, we have to know that that happened, or we can't bring it to a head. And at the same time, that healing can allow us to see what is coming on down the road in terms of these various layers of transhumanism, that if you were not awake, aware, and discerning in advance, you may just feel like you got pushed down a hallway with a large crowd of equally unconscious people into that being your future fate. So bring us back full circle on how you really see our audience. And we have anywhere from 5 to 10,000 every Monday night that are saying, yeah, I know a little bit about Q, and yeah, I know a little bit about these indictments, and yeah, I know that I want my consciousness to be helping humanity move forward and progress. Where would you say is the best starting point right now for embracing the darkness so that we can actually walk into a much more enlightened and really ample choice ridden future? Adam, this is a loaded question, forgive me, but I just want to go there. We're wrapping up on the hour.
It's a great question. It's a great question. I would say find the courage to stand your ground when you know something to be true, and find the humility to stand down, to humble your ego when there's something that is not true. And I've been doing my best now that I've kind of stepped into a public light over the last year and a half. I've been doing my best to refine my speech so that it can be impeccable. I want to say, I don't know when I don't know. And I want to say, I think when it's just speculation. And I don't want to put a period at the end of a statement that I'm not necessarily sure of. Mm-hmm. And I think that as ambassadors of truth, we are tasked with a very profound responsibility to be good disciples for our brand, to be good disciples for our message. And if we hope to invoke change in others and ultimately the world, we want to invite others into their own healing process. And we don't do that by going in their faces, yelling, or speaking sternly and saying, I'm right, you're wrong. Because when we engage with others on a one-on-one basis, we're doing a dance with their ego, with our ego. And so there's a little bit of an interesting dynamic that can occur there. And you can meet that with grace, or you can meet it with whatever the opposite of grace is.
Righteous indignation, maybe.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. And so I would say, look, if you want to invoke change, again, that's a noble goal. But think about, how the best way to do that is. Invite them to tell their story before you immediately go and tell yours. Everyone's favorite word is their own name. And the most commonly spoke word in the English language is the word I, because people like talking about themselves. So invite that out, have a Socratic dialogue, dissect their worldview, and identify the inception of some of their rigid belief systems. And then you can start to deconstruct them brick by brick. But it's not going to happen if you come in with the wrecking ball of your conclusions. And we need to invite others into their own healing process so that they can start to change, because the only lasting change is one that's done individually, is the one that you choose to do. If I come in and kick you out of your house, if I evict you, you're going to be upset with me. But if I say, hey, there's a mansion across the street, or there's a mansion in in the Caribbean, do you want to come move in there? You might just say, yeah, that sounds a lot better. I'll happily move.
It's a whole different realm of friendliness, Adam, and you definitely have a beckoning nature, and you make your not only your expert guests that come on Dauntless Dialogue feel welcome, but you also have a gentle and tender appeal to those that are listening to sometimes, challenging challenging information and educational sound bites. And so I want to welcome our viewers to be looking at Dauntless Dialogue. I would like to redirect them back to your website, your book, obviously your YouTube channel. And if you could tell them some of the hot topics in disclosure, because we're doing a lot with disclosure. As you mentioned, I've just come back from 2 major conferences, Dimensions of Disclosure with Corey Good and David Wilcock, Emery Smith. And we'll be doing a lot more featuring of members from that conference for the next few months. But if you can touch on some of the disclosure topics that they can find in your work and where to find you, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So they can find more of my work at dauntlessdialogue.com. That's the main portal. And from that, they can be linked to the YouTube page, the Instagram, the Facebook, you name it. The YouTube channel is where I do the majority of my public sharing of work. You can find something for everyone there. There's long form podcasts where I have conversations like this with some very interesting individuals. And then there's shorter videos that I'm starting to put out now. And then there's, the breakaway series where I interview individuals from the Secret Space program. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot there. One of the things that I find extremely important that I'm trying to bring forward in my work mm-hmm. is the identification and the exposure of cultural conspiracies. It seems kind of obvious when people get into the conspiracy movement or the disclosure movement or the truth movement. They identify certain events and they go, look at 9/11. They say, look at, the Oklahoma City bombing or look, and they point to these events. They point to these things. They point to the Bilderberg conference. It's like, okay, that's great. And that's a great starting place. But I think that there's a more pervasive, more everyday form of conspiracy. And I just loosely refer to them as cultural conspiracies. Mm-hmm. These are ideologies that have been oftentimes created by the architects of control and sort of, sort of permeate everyday conversations, everyday politics, in the public school system, in organized religion. These ideologies are corrosive to the human spirit, to human liberties, to personal freedoms, to the progress of the human civilization. They're dysgenic conspiracies. They break down society entropically. And so I do my best to identify those, to invite others to point to them and say, hey, that's not right. I don't agree with that philosophy. I'm coming from a place of, first principles and philosophy and morality. And I think that is the starting place.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's true. I don't think as often do people recognize just the day-to-day mechanics of human language and some of the assumptions that we make about the nature of the universe and ourselves being separate energetic units or separate consciousness units, very much along the lines of what you've just said, are conspiracies / belief systems that we've made dogmatic and that we hold so fiercely to that we often are willing to turn on those that we would love if we find them challenged because they become such an integral part of who we are. So the courage is really the first point. And I'm so grateful you brought that out to our audience. You've got to have the courage to look at some of these things, question why you respond the way you do, question why you need to believe something is so deeply, deeply true without examining it maybe from the rational 32-year-old mind you have, as opposed to the 16-year-old mind that took on that belief. We really have to examine ourselves first and foremost, as you and Genesee have stated so clearly tonight, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It's paramount that individuals contemplate what it means to be a hero. And if you look at the work of Jordan Peterson, he talks about the meta hero. So, the Christ figure and others like him, what did they stand for? Even if you're just dissecting it from a symbolic standpoint, you know, when we talk about courage and standing up in defiance of tyranny, that's what makes a hero. But also the gentle side, the compassionate side, the empathetic side, the humble side. And I think having a healthy balance between those two, one is more of a, you could call it a divine masculine, and was more of a divine feminine, and walking that balance.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Absolutely agreed. And we know that once every individual, given the opportunity to reflect, given the opportunity to understand the sentient oneness for which we are all a part, whether you are a deeply philosophical person or you're just following evolving quantum mechanics and quantum physics, we are all one. What hurts one hurts all of us. What holds one back holds back every single one of us. But if we all did that reflective time, as you and Genesee have been talking about tonight, society could heal itself overnight. And so I'm just really honored that you came on and joined us tonight. We only scratched the surface on some deep dive, darker topics that are coming to light and are probably going to become increasingly more public, but that you've had the courage to have. And I encourage our viewers and our listeners, take a look at Dauntless Dialogue, see some of the witnesses that have come forward and the amazing testimony that's been given with Adam's interviews. And thank you for joining us tonight, Adam. It's really been a privilege having you with us here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Genesee. Thank you so much, Dr. Irvin. It's been a pleasure. You girls are a lot of fun, and I wish you all the best with the growth of your channel.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. And Genesee, thanks for being here with us tonight. You and I both know working on that way showing, boots on the ground, being really in it to win it. We mean what we're doing. We're not just talking about the flowery talk and staying in the airy fairy comfort zones. We do have to do some of the deep scaling work, as you have shown our listeners, our viewers, with chakra theory and working on those areas that are very often blind to many of us. And tonight is no exception. I want to thank our audience for coming and joining us tonight and being willing to sift through some of these heavier topics so that we can get to the other side of a far more beautiful, far more fruitful and unified society, because together we are the solution.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.